So I like this question. The question basically is like, why is faith so strong? And it's that I think that's a simple question, but it's also got a lot of layers to it. Um, and I'll let you think of kind of an answer, Mackenzie.
Will you repeat it one more time? You cut out.
Yeah, why is faith so strong? Like, why is it so strong? Um, and I think that's such an interesting question to ask because when I first saw it, I started thinking about how faith is an answer to so many problems that are like in the world. And what I mean by that is that so much of about like what we're going through right now and what is going on in the world and really just any time at any point in your life, there's so much that is uncertain that can be like that can make you afraid or that can give you reasons for anxiety. And faith so often I think is strong in those situations because when you put your faith in the right thing, it allows you to start to have a sense of like direction, I think, a sense of yeah of it's faith in my opinion is what like what can help us get through times of uncertainty because it's a matter of putting our trust in something that is um, more certain. So, like for me, recently, I've been thinking a lot about, like where do I find my sense of security? Like where do I find security in everything and in life? And I just really started having faith in some of the scriptures that I was reading. And I started looking at some of the scriptures that talk about God's promises. Um, and I had realized that so much of my life I'd been putting a lot of my sense of security in like people and some of that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think putting security in a family can be a good thing, or whatever it may be, but I wasn't putting my sense of faith, I guess, recently, and it's easy to do kind of, but I wasn't putting my sense of faith in something more sturdy like God's promises. And I think once I started thinking about faith and putting faith in placing my faith on God's promises or on God's scripture, things started to make a little bit more sense. I was able to start feeling a sense of security because I know that God's looking out for us, and that that's the primary thing that I would say. So why is faith so strong? I think it's strong when we put it in the right things, because it's a level of trust in knowing that God is taking us um, into the unknown, and that God's taking care of us in the unknown. So I love that question. It made me think really hard.
Yeah. I'm trying to think just because when you asked it, I kind of went in the direction of leap of faith. And I think it's really easy to have beliefs or to have certain things, convictions almost, or, when we're told something, I start thinking about school. When we're told that, and this is just what my mind is going to, but like when we're told that water as a liquid is going to turn to a solid if we freeze it, and we can prove that, and it can be something that we can follow steps to make sure that we understand the water cycle, or different like solid liquid gas, or different experiments. We can prove certain things. We can prove different events in history and why they happened and what happened, and go through all of that. But I think faith is so strong because it is something that you have to put time, effort, and emotion into, but also it's that relationship. And so I think that as we work towards that, as we continue, like Stephen said, to put our trust in that, we grow stronger, but that relationship grows stronger with God. The relationship grows stronger with the ways that we handle certain things. I think the ways that we approach digging into scripture, prayer, all of the different aspects of faith, or the things that help us have more faith. But I think it's strong because it can be challenged. It's not something that we can prove. It's not something that we can have a tangible solid liquid gas sort of thing. And I think that metaphor is kind of weird, but I think when faith becomes strong is when it's tested, and we can't necessarily prove it with something tangible, but we can prove it with the ways that we live our lives, or the ways that we interact with other people, or the ways that we react to certain situations and certain struggles or triumphs that we go through. So, are there any, oh, Stephen, yep.
We have a follow-up to that, and that is, what does faith look like when things aren't going right? That's a great question. What does faith look like when things aren't going right? You know, I'm really glad that you asked that question, because for me, faith doesn't look like certainty. Like, it doesn't look like having all the answers. Does that make sense? Like, it doesn't look like thinking I know what's coming next. It doesn't look like a blueprint to life. It doesn't look like a bunch of GPS turns saying go here, go here, go here, go here, go here, or anything like that. Faith to me, and I think times of like hardship really can, for me, I like to say, like, kind of cut out the fluff of faith for me. So for me, right now, with things not looking just like spectacular, right? I think we're all in that. I think we're all feeling kind of the heaviness, if we're honest, about this situation. Faith to me looks more like a constant conversation, and I guess my relationship with God looks like a constant conversation. Sure, it talks about pray without ceasing, and what does that mean? And I think for me, faith looks like showing up to the conversation. It looks like showing up to listen to what God might be saying on a given day or in a given hour, or what God might be inspiring in other people, and that kind of thing. I think faith to me looks like showing up. I think it looks like of us doing the work of reading scripture, of working hard to pray each day, and prayer is pretty hard. But for me, faith in a bad time, right now, it's helping me figure out what is important to my faith. Does that make sense? Like, it's helping me to figure out, you know, how I listen to God, how I do the basics of reading scripture, whatever it may be. So faith in the hard times, I think, can help sustain us, because it's a matter of us sort of showing up to the conversation. Does that make sense? You can ask more questions on that, but I think it looks like us doing the very simple, and that doesn't mean like we have to pray like really lengthy prayers or anything like that. I think it can literally just mean opening up to a book of the Bible. I would recommend reading something in the New Testament so you don't get like really confused by all the ins and outs of it. But I think it might look like showing up and reading like reading parts of the New Testament or something like that, and then having a dialogue. Um, but I think it's a matter of showing up to the conversation. I hope that made sense and wasn't too kind of like out there. But I think it looks like doing the basic things right, like showing up for prayer or showing up for worship or showing up for small group, because I think those are the things that help sustain us, that God speaks to us through those things. So that's my answer in a very long, drawn out way.
So the question was, what does faith look like in the difficult times? And I think it's a tricky answer because I think as you go through the difficult times, it may change. There may be a certain season where you're going through difficulty with friends, and there may be a certain season where you're going through difficulty with insecurities or doubts. There's many different seasons, and there's many different highs and lows that we go through for our faith. And I think, to Stephen's point, there are definitely things like reading scripture, like prayer, like showing up, like being in community that help across the board. But I think faith in difficult times depends. Some of us are verbal processors. So some of us love to talk in community and to be in a place with our small groups where we can come and be honest and have them sit with us in it. Some of us love to internally process. So being able to journal and to have that be an act of worship and an act of prayer. I think big blanket statement is faith in difficult times really depends on who you are and what your relationship with God is. But I also think that we can talk about that in terms of faith in difficult times can look like our relationships when we're in difficult times with our friends, with our family, with the people that we care about. And so relationships, when we go through those difficult times, I know for me, like Stephen said, it looks like showing up. It looks like making an effort. It looks like being present. And I think that's going to depend on what being present means to you. For me, I love when people are present and it's a one-on-one. We just get to talk. We just get to know each other a little bit more. But you can tell that both the people are putting in the effort. And so in this equation, our faith is us showing up to where God already is. It's us showing up to interpret the scriptures and to dig through them. It's us showing up to prayer. It's us showing up to worship and making everything that we do some sort of act of worship. So even in this really difficult time, potentially going on a walk and having that be your prayer time. It doesn't have to be one more thing to add to being in your room for 24 hours a day. Like, it doesn't have to be more physical effort, but I think it has to be more mental presence, and it has to be more awareness that faith is something to lean on, if that makes sense. Maybe. But yeah, those are great questions. I think we have time for maybe one more, and if we don't have any more, I love this series, and we can definitely keep going with it as you guys think of more questions to ask. We do have one more song of worship, but do we have one more question?
I do, and my goodness, it's a doozy. So I will say these questions are welcome because I think one of the things that I always want to remind you guys is that the difficult questions are encouraged around here. Okay, so here's the question, and I don't know if I can give you a very like pristine answer, but here we go. The question, it's actually, you might have heard this question before, but it's a little different. So why do good things happen to bad people? See, now that's normally why do bad things happen to good people? What I would normally hear, but this question is a little different because it's why do good things happen to bad people? And gosh, I don't want to sugarcoat it. There are times when somebody gets their way who might not like them very much, right? Like um, like we might see that that person is getting something that we feel like they don't deserve, right? I mean, you could think of any number of situations where that might be the case. But what I will say is, I think uh, I want us to look at the last part of that question, where it says bad people, right? And I want us to remember that people are capable of both good decisions and bad decisions, right? And here's what I also want to affirm and really encourage you guys to think about is, how does God look at each and every person? How does God look at each and every person? In Genesis, it says that uh, in the image of God we were created, right? Male and female we were created, right? And that statement is given to every single person. It's given to everybody. And so bad people, I want us to think about, do they still have the image of God? Like, can we still see God in them, right? Even if it's really, 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 really difficult, right? And we think that they don't deserve any blessings or they don't deserve any of the good things that we think that they have, right? How does God look at that person? How does God look at that person? And personally, and this is where like I'll ask that question and you can answer that question how you might want to answer it. But for me, I've got to believe that God sent God's only son into the world to offer grace to all of us. And that offering is given to people who we feel like they are bad, right? And so it's not for us to say, why do good things happen to bad people or bad things happen to good people? What I do know is that God does love all of us. Now, some of us make bad choices, and some of us make choices out of faith and hope and love. But in all of that, it's 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 not a it's not a good place to be for us to compare like good things for bad people or bad things for good people. But what I do know is that God's grace is given to all people, and that we can live into our own journeys and our own walks of faith without having or feeling like we need to compare our faith journey with people who we feel like might be not having, like they might not have faith. So the question that I want to ask for you guys to see, if you ask a hard question like that, I'm always going to give you a question right back at you. The question that I want you to ask is, how do you feel like God looks at that person? That makes sense? Okay, Mackenzie, you go.
So this is hard because Stephen has the greatest answers. And so you guys get to hear me kind of ramble and process with you as I am listening to him and then taking stuff and going with it. But the first thing that came to mind is I grew up and my mom always told me that winners never cheat and cheaters never win. And I don't know if you guys heard that when you were growing up, but that was a common phrase in the Johnson household. So all that being said, her point usually was in the long run, so in the time of school or different stuff like that, in the time of life, basically, winners never cheat and cheaters never win, saying that eventually it's going to catch up to you. Now, know that as I love my mom, but she's definitely a Christmas, Easter crowd sort of girl. So the faith part was a part that I stepped out on my own, where grace and all of that is found. And so as I grew up, I started thinking about that saying, and we know athletes who have won a ton, and then we find out that they've cheated. We know cheaters. I know that you guys probably know of people in your school that copy homework or cheat on tests, and they're fine. I knew of people in college that cheated on tests, and they graduated right next to me. And so in all of that, kind of to Stephen's point of now we can point to them and say, you cheated, so you shouldn't win. You're a winner, so you shouldn't cheat, and we hold you to a higher standard. But I do think that's where the grace component comes in. I also think that as I was growing up and in middle school and high school, and even in college, even now, there's some things about our faith that I kind of chalk up to, we don't get to know the answer to that, which I know isn't a helpful thing. But sometimes it's easier for me to say, we don't get to know the answer to that, write that down in the journal, we'll come back to it when we have a better understanding. And I think that doesn't help us either. So we also get to kind of, to what Stephen's point is, we get to know each other and we get to learn with each other, but we are not called to judge each other. That is not our job. That is not our walk. That doesn't help us in the slightest. And I think that kind of obviously evens the playing field. And so with the question, sorry, that was long-winded, but with the question, why do good things happen to bad people? I do think with that and the counterpart of why do bad things happen to good people, we just need to take the clarifying good or bad out of it. And a lot of the times the answer just gets to be because that's what was in the plan for them. That is either grace or that is something that is going to strengthen their faith, and we get to walk through the bad things with them. It helps strengthen our community. It helps strengthen our relationships. And so we can kind of take the judgment out of it and just present grace and love within that question. And so big bullet point answer was, for me, is sometimes we just don't get to know, but we can be there for all of the people in our lives and the choices they make and the things that happen to them.